Hello, everyone. My name is Bill Coughlin, and welcome to First Person Civil War Podcast, which retells the stories of the soldiers, officers, and for this episode, cadets, on the ground in the battles of the Civil War. Episode 36 is entitled Cadet Captain Frank Preston and the VMI Cadets at the Battle of New Market. This episode's source was published by a VMI New Market cadet, who relied on a letter that Frank Preston wrote 4 days after the battle, and is entitled The Battle of New Market and the Cadets of the Virginia Military Institute, May 15, 1864, which was published in 1914. This episode's source material does not provide information of Frank Preston's early life, but newspapers and census records do shed a little detail. Frank Preston was born in 1841 and lived in Lexington, Virginia, which is the same city of the Virginia Military Institute, where he gained admittance to on 28 June 1860. Also known as VMI, it has served in the capacity of a military college since its founding in 1839. Not only does Frank Preston show up in the 1860 census with his family in Lexington at the age of 19, but he was also in the census records of VMI alongside 91 other cadets and annotated as students of War College. Attendees of VMI mostly hailed from Virginia, but men from outside the state were welcome as there were also cadets from Louisiana, Tennessee, Mississippi, and Alabama. Though no further information within the census is available in terms of what unit Frank Preston was in, 92 men was an acceptable number to form a company, meaning this was most likely his cadet company. Unlike the United States Military Academy at West Point, the Virginia Military Institute was formed as a state military college. The students, or cadets, pursued academics, but were also students of war. They formed cadet companies, performed infantry drills, and learned how to employ artillery. Upon graduation, they also commissioned into the U.S. Army. With the start of the Civil War, VMI remained open and continued to produce officers for service in the Confederate Army. Between 1861 and early 1864, the cadets of VMI drilled regiments preparing for combat, and though they were exempt from conscription, a cadet leaving VMI to fight at the front was common. At several times during the war, VMI as a unit supported Confederate military operations, but they were never pressed into a fight until 15 May 1864. As stated in previous episodes, the Shenandoah Valley was a critical piece to the overall Union plan of attack in 1864. In early May, Major General Franz Sigel, commander of the Department of West Virginia, which was the newly formed state, received orders from Lieutenant General Grant to march his command of approximately 10,000 men into the valley to destroy logistical infrastructure like railroads and supply depots. With this movement, the Valley Campaign of 1864 began. Major General John C. Breckenridge, commander of the Confederate Department of West Virginia, meeting the Shenandoah Valley and the old boundary of Virginia that stretched westward, learned of this advance from General John D. Imboden, whose cavalry force operated in the northern part of the valley. On top of alerting Major General Breckenridge and his infantry further south, Brigadier General Imboden understood that the Union Army outnumbered the entire Confederate force in the valley, and he began scraping together units wherever he could find them. On 10 May 1864, the VMI cadets received orders to join Major General Breckenridge's army, and they were to march from Lexington to Stanton, approximately 35 miles up the valley. The Virginia Military Institute formed an infantry battalion of 279 cadets and divided into companies A, B, C, and D, as well as one section of artillery. Cadet Frank Preston, by this time, was in his final year at VMI and in command of Company B. As a company commander, he received a commission into the Confederate Army as a captain and got his men ready to march. The cadets were awakened by the long roll on the night of May 10 and ordered to march early the next morning. On Wednesday morning, May 11, the Corps left barracks and marched all day over the old Stanton Road, always in bad condition, especially in the rainy season, to the town of Midway, approximately 18 miles north of Lexington, and went into camp, sleeping in the rain that night. They marched all day on the 12th and 13th, linked up with Major General Breckenridge's infantry, and he continues. On May 14, the Corps continued down the pike, through Harrisonburg, to within 7 miles of New Market, a march of about 15 miles, and went into camp in a body of woods on the east side of the pike. Major General Breckenridge's Confederates that arrived in the vicinity of New Market, Virginia, consisted of 2 brigades of infantry, 1 brigade of cavalry, 3 batteries of artillery, and 4 attached commands of varying sizes, which included the VMI Cadets. At 1 a.m. on 15 May 1864, the cadets awoke in the rain and gathered around Captain Preston, who led the entire battalion in a prayer. The rain, which fell for several days by this time, brought several halts as they continued north along the turnpike, and after approximately 10 hours of marching, the cadets arrived at New Market. Lieutenant Colonel Scott Shipp, Commandant of Cadets at VMI and the commander of the battalion on that day, received orders from Major General Breckenridge on the initial placement of the cadets. The general, having determined to receive the attack of the enemy, made his dispositions for battle, posting the Corps in reserve. He informed me that he did not wish to put the cadets in if he could avoid it, but should the occasion require it, he would use them freely. Though in reserve at the beginning of the battle, Captain Preston and the VMI Corps of Cadets were still within range of Union artillery. The Corps then advanced north, in line of battle, in the third and last echelon, over the crest of Shirley's Hill, which was west of the town of New Market. As the U.S. batteries did not get the range of the Corps until it reached the north slope of Shirley's Hill on its descent to the river road, there were no casualties up to that point. But on the descent, Captain Hill of Company C and Corporal J.S. Weiss of Company D and several others were wounded by the explosion of 1 or more U.S. shells. This was the Corps' baptism of blood. Opposite the Confederates upon Shirley's Hill was the 1st Union line, which included Major Henry Peel, commander of the 18th Connecticut. At the moment of our arrival, the artillery, designed to discover the position and designs of the enemy, commenced operations. The regiment was ordered to assist in support of Kleiser's battery. The position of our forces was on a hill northwest of New Market, and distant from the town of half a mile. The enemy soon replied to our batteries from a wooded eminence 3/4 of a mile south and slightly commanding our position. The 18th Connecticut remained in line for about 1 hour as the artillery dueled, and he continues, "The enemy in 3 strong lines now issued from the woods and charged down the hill at the double quick. His skirmishers also increased their speed, in driving ours more rapidly." Captain Preston and the VMI cadets, still in reserve, prepared for this advance against the Union first line, and it seemed not all of the men on the field that day wanted to go into the fight. Just as a side note, the first echelon was skirmishers, second echelon was the main line, and the third echelon was the reserve line. In the ravine north of Shirley's Hill, the cadets were halted and made to discard their blankets, etc. And here they saw, for the first time, a sight which amazed them more than the carnage of battle. The officers of the veteran command composing the second echelon, almost in front of the corps, when their regiment was ordered to advance, had to force the skulkers into ranks at the points of their pistols. Just as the Confederates made their first advance, the commander of the first Union line assessed that a knoll in their rear was a better position to fight in order to retreat. While this should have been a simple march across the field, it proved difficult for Major Peel in the 18th Connecticut. The new position of the regiment was most unfortunate for its efficiency, being in a lane backed by barns and 2 rows of fences. A continuous rain of 5 days had rendered traveling on other than the roads extremely difficult, and the men stood in knee-deep mud. As the lane was entered by the flank, so nothing but a flank movement could extricate the regiment in order. The Confederates saw success in dislodging the Union first line, and they retreated to the main line approximately 1 mile north toward Bushong Hill. As the entire Confederate line advanced, Major General Breckenridge called on Lieutenant Colonel Shipp to receive updated orders for the attack. Here General Breckenridge sent for me and gave me in person my instructions. Instead of 1 line with a reserve, he formed his infantry in 2. He then described the cavalry and artillery dispositions and continues. The lines having been adjusted, the order to advance was passed. Wharton's line, meaning the first line, advanced. Eccles, with the VMI Cadets included, followed at 250 paces in rear. As Wharton's line ascended a knoll, it came under full view of the enemy's batteries, which opened a heavy fire, but not having gotten the range, did but little damage. Captain Preston and the VMI Cadets were under artillery fire and sporadic musketry throughout the advance, and they had no choice but to endure it. When the corps reached the point several hundred yards south of Bushong House, it was subjected to a terrible fire of artillery, and he continues, the corps marched steadily and continuously over this open plateau up to the south front of the Bushong House, through mud in many places over the ankles, a portion of the time being under artillery and musketry fire. The alignment of the battalion was like that on parade. The gaps in the ranks caused by the killed and wounded men were filled automatically, as if nothing unusual had happened, and at no time did the corps' battle line ever waver. As the Confederate line advanced north of the Bushong House, Captain Preston and the VMI Cadets came under direct fire from the 34th Massachusetts. The deadly fire of shells, grape, canister, and bullets to which the corps was subjected in the Bushong Orchard did not cause it to retreat or even fall back temporarily, but the cadets ran forward to the remains of a demolished rail fence on the north end of the orchard, laid down behind the fence, and began, for the first time, to fire upon the enemy. The corps, by its rapid advance, having just gotten into the first line of battle, filled a gap caused by a change of position of 1 or more other commands. According to Captain Preston, the 51st Virginia on the left of the cadets and the 62nd Virginia on their right suffered heavily during this advance and began to break under this pressure. Due to poor leadership in the advancing Union line, the musketry would soon dissipate. Colonel George D. Wells, commander of the 34th Massachusetts, who advanced alongside several other regiments, found his command alone in front of the Confederate line. I shouted at them to halt, but could not make a single man hear or heed me, and it was not until they had climbed an intervening fence and were rushing ahead on the other side that I was able to run along the lines and, seizing the color bearer by the shoulders, hold him fast as the only way of stopping the regiment. Despite his best efforts, Colonel Wells was unable to bolster his line under Confederate fire, which included the VMI Cadets moving into position. Now exposed and outnumbered, the 34th Massachusetts retreated back across the muddy field, north of the Bushong House. With failed advances upon both Confederate flanks, and the Virginia regiments on the left flank rallying, Major General Breckenridge assessed the time was ripe for a charge. Captain Preston and the VMI Cadets advanced directly upon the 34th Massachusetts, which returned to their original position. When the heavy artillery fire ceased, the command was given to the corps to charge. This order was obeyed, not only with alacrity, but with enthusiasm. And though the company organizations were gone, yet they rallied round the colors and formed some sort of line as we advanced. So eager were the cadets to charge the enemy 100 to 150 yards off that it was difficult for them to find the time to load and shoot their old-fashioned muzzle-loading muskets. This final charge commenced in the wheat field, then a field of mud just north of the Bushong orchard, and continued for some distance north towards the Pike Bridge over the Shenandoah. As the Confederate charge slammed into the 34th Massachusetts and the entire Union right flank, Colonel Wells recognized that the line could not hold and ordered a retreat. The rebels were coming on at the double quick and concentrating their whole fire upon us. I told the men to run and get out of fire as quickly as possible and rally behind the 1st Cavalry line found in the rear. The colors were halted several times by different officers in positions where it was impossible to make a stand, and would only start again at my direct order. With the Confederate Army in pursuit, Union regiments retreated and rallied around Rude's Hill, which brought an end to the rout. Not wanting to continue his campaign, Major General Sigel ordered the army to cross the Shenandoah River and burned the bridge behind them, which left the Confederates fully in control of the field. The Battle of New Market was the only time that the cadets of the Virginia Military Institute fought in a battle, as several VMI cadets lost their shoes in the thick mud as they charged toward the Union line. The field north of the Bushong House is now known as the Field of Lost Shoes. The anonymous cadet author did not mention the lost shoes in his book, The Battle of New Market and the Cadets of the Virginia Military Institute, May 15, 1864. But he did address a separate point of contention when describing the aftermath of the battle. As it is the desire of the writer that this brief statement shall contain nothing but the undisputed facts of the cadets' connection with the battle, no effort will be made to fix the location, number, or condition of the U.S. guns captured by the cadets, since these questions have given rise to much controversy, and no definitive conclusion has yet been reached. The cadets were credited with the capture of 60 to 100 prisoners. After the war, Frank Preston became a professor at William and Mary College in Williamsburg, Virginia, and taught Greek and German languages and histories. He died in November of 1869, 45 years before his letter about the VMI cadets at the Battle of New Market provided source material for a book. Thank you for listening to the 36th episode. The link to the book based on Frank Preston's letter is now available on the podcast website, firstpersoncivilwarpodcast.com. On Facebook, Instagram, X, and LinkedIn this week, you will find a picture of Frank Preston sometime after the battle. I'd like to thank the museum Historic Smithfield of Blacksburg, Virginia, for allowing me to use this photo in my social media posts and on the homepage of the website. Please check them out at www.historicsmithfield.org. Link available in the show notes. In 2 weeks' time, Reverend Frederick Dennison, chaplain of the 3rd Rhode Island Heavy Artillery, provides next episode's first-person account at the 1863 siege of Fort Sumter. My name is Bill Coughlin, and thank you for listening to First Person Civil War Podcast.